A very warm welcome once again. We've had two very interesting sessions, and all of those who are tuned in on our platforms, multiple platforms of Business Today and the India Today group, and here in the audience. It's a great privilege to have such a wonderful panel. It's somebody which a panel which represents the entire spectrum of what one would need to discuss an India in 2047 in economic terms. And before I start, I just want, Mr. Ranade, I'm coming to you to tell our audience here in the simplest manner possible, from independence to now, 75 years, if we were to describe our economic evolution and economic growth, how would you quickly summarize it?
It is, thanks Siddharth. It's nothing, it's a miracle, I would say. We have come from the bottom of the league. Basically, when India became independent of colonial rule in 1947, we were extremely impoverished thanks to the colonial exploitation of 2 centuries. Our life expectancy was merely 32 years, I believe. And of course, it was highly illiterate as well. So poverty, illiteracy, and short life expectancy. Today, we are the 3rd largest economy in the world. Our life expectancy is, I guess, 63, 65. And poverty rate officially is down to, I think, single digits, or you can quibble about that. It's nothing but a miracle, I think. And consistently, we have never had a negative...
I'll request the audience to do one round of claps for this miracle. We sometimes become very cynical. I think cynicism has its own place.
No, we take it for granted, Siddharth. In 1947, the United Nations, which existed, had about maybe 80 or 90 members. Today, the United Nations has 213 members. It's not like we have more real estate in planet Earth. Countries have broken up. The giant USSR broke up into 10 countries. As recently as 2022, this year, a new country was born called South Sudan. Our own twin, which was born on the same day, broke up into 2. I think that's the second miracle, because politics and economics go together. The political miracle is that India is not only in one piece, but thriving and flourishing. We must celebrate that. This represents 1/6 of humanity. And so I think it's nothing but a miracle, I think.
And a continent-sized country with 1/6 of humanity, and if 47 hadn't happened, at least the part of the partition, it would have been much bigger. And before I go to Shamika again on the same question, just a bit more flavor to what Mr. Ranade told us. Output has increased 40 times in 75 years. Population has gone up 4 times. Given those pressures, would you agree that we are a miracle on the face of planet Earth?
Yes, Siddharth, we are a miracle. But as someone under 50, we want more. Dil chahe more. There's a lot. And we have a huge political and economic giant sitting next to us, whom we have to keep in mind moving forward. So looking ahead, we just cannot take our eyes off the growth ball.
Top 3 Dil Chahta Hai More items from you.
I think first is Atmanirbharta. I think Atmanirbharta is not just a pipe dream. The pandemic has made it very clear that whenever the global rules-based order is going to come in conflict with national interest will trump. This we have seen country after country. And you saw it in the form of vaccination, the way they were stockpiling, the degree of what we call selfishness, but eventually it is national interest. We will have to balance that national interest with the fact that in the first 50 years we suffered because of autarky. So that balancing act is something we have to keep in mind. And within that, I think food security. Food security, I think we have done a phenomenal job, and moving forward, we'll only do better. Second is energy security. I think that is our key concern, Siddharth. That energy right now is our biggest strategic challenge if you consider the economy. We are a young, hungry country. If you look at the per capita income, we are still 1/4, 1/5 of China's. And we have a long way to go. So the consumption of energy is rising very fast, but more than 30% of that is imported. We will have to therefore make this whole renewable energy movement has to become like the green revolution. Mass movement.
Another green revolution, and this time a green energy revolution. Mr. Ramesh, I'm coming to you because when we discuss broad headline numbers, GDP, inflation, purchasing power parity, and the incomes of our countrymen, we cannot forget those countrymen who actually feed us, the hungry masses, as Shamika said, the roughly 400 to 450 million people, again continental sized proportions, who are dependent on the agriculture sector for keeping India ticking. Sir, what will the agriculture sector look like 25 years from now? Because I don't want a history lesson at this point of time. Some note of optimism. Will our farmers be happy? Will their incomes be much higher than they are currently?
Well, Siddharth, I feel that agriculture has defied most of the forecast about it in the past, and I feel same is going to happen in future also, provided we are able to put in place right kind of vision for agriculture. To my mind, till now, we did very well in terms of addressing food security of the country. You mentioned some number. I just give you one number which surmise all those indicators. Between 51 and 2022, per capita production of food has doubled. Per capita production of food has doubled. And now, but we are having in agriculture, we are required to export 1/3 of our growth to other countries. So we are producing at a rate, our food supply is growing at a rate much higher than what is the growth rate in the domestic demand. To my mind, the future challenge which agriculture will be looked at or should be looked at to address are three. One is challenge of employment. Industry 4.0 or Industry 5.0 is not going to offer any kind of required job to people. Forget about decent job. We are already witnessing it. Industry is going for all kind of artificial intelligence, capital intensive production. So your argument of that Arthur Lewis, that labor will shift out of agriculture to industry, I think that is no more true. And we have to look at agriculture for decent jobs, not for mere job. The second is the big challenge of climate change. Again, there agriculture is both part of the problem, but it can be part of the solution also. We have to look at agriculture. And third issue is of sustainability. Whether it is water, whether it is air quality, whether it is forest, quality air, agriculture is going to play very significant role. So I look at agriculture, the sector whose contribution in terms of percent share of GDP, the way we measure it, will go down. But if you look at overall contribution of agriculture, I think it will turn out to be much higher in future than what it is now.
That's an absolutely brilliant point, and I would request the audience to reflect on what Mr. Ramesh Chand is saying. Industry will not be able to provide jobs to the youth who come from our agriculture society, and if they don't get those jobs, where will they go? So beyond the MSP, beyond the laws and that debate, there is a real societal issue. And what he said at the very end, while we live in our cities, in our gated communities, in our condominiums, in our villas, when stubble is burnt, that reaches you and right inside your chest. So agriculture is not something that is distant, it is within us. Mr. Gopalan, you have spent a lifetime in making policy, and for the benefit of this audience, Mr. Gopalan represents that rare breed of bureaucrats who started off in the license Raj era and who saw the transition to a delicensed era. Today, most sectors are delicensed. FDI, the levels that are permitted are amongst the highest if you compare it with any economy. We are a very advanced economy when it comes to those rules. But there is still a lot of regulatory cholesterol, and that gives our economy constant heart attacks. Mr. Gopalan, what is required over the next decade, 2.5, for India to fully and finally shed the skin of the license Raj?
Well, let me come to the question which you raised, and let me branch off into something else beyond. As far as the economic freedom is concerned, it has been very well known that we still have to travel a long way to ensure that regulatory blocks which are there to prevent entrepreneurs from making their real contribution to the society is not, happening at this point in time. So, though we have crossed a huge set of regulations, we have from 91 onwards, we have done quite a good amount of work, but there have been very small baby steps kind of thing which has happened. What we really need to do is to ensure that we climb up in the ranking of the economic freedom, which I think has a whole host of things, except, apart from your regulations which you have in controlling industries, or your legal side where you want the courts to dispose of issues, commercial disputes in time, or you look at a whole host of things, there is an economic freedom angle involved, which I think is something which we need to really work on. But looking at the next 25 years, I would say the broad thing which we should look at is how we become very strong. Strong in defense, strong in economy. Now, unless you are strong in defense and economy, I think you are not going to be having the kind of influence which you are now, seeing to, have. You won't be having it as we go along, because there are a lot of countries which will overtake you. So these two are the areas in which we really need to, focus on. And I will talk a little later about them, but there are various components in this which will require even defense industries privatization or joint sector operation, and welcoming a lot of industries, a lot of technologies coming into the country. Development of technology, innovation is another area where we need to really focus on. There are a whole host of areas in which we need to systematically lay out a road map for the next about 25 years, and pursue it with diligence and efficiency.
Mr. Gopalan, that's a good point. From Gore Sahab ki Sarkar to Mai Baap ki Sarkar, DC DM Sahab ki Sarkar. I take up another point, Mr. Ranade, and I'm coming to you and explain to our audience. You have seen two devaluations of the rupee. And when we talk about the rupee in the public discourse, its rate of exchange to the dollar becomes synonymous with national pride, with depending on which side of the political argument you are, that the economy is not doing well, or the other side of the argument. Mr. Ranade, will India need to go in for a third devaluation ever?
First of all, I think if we agree that the rupee-dollar rate is determined by the market rate, तो कोई वहाँ पे बैठा नहीं है जो devalue करने वाला. मतलब, we should accept that the exchange rate is market determined. That's one. So the devaluation, if it will happen, hopefully it will happen through a market process, and no big boss is going to control like a puppeteer. And also remember, ultimately in the medium to long term, what is the value of your currency? When you have 100 rupees in your pocket today, 1 year later, that is worth only 90 rupees because 10% inflation hai. So if internally the value of the rupee is going down, surely external the value of the rupee can't be going up. There has to be some parity between the external value of the rupee and internal value of the rupee. In the dollar world, except for now because of Ukraine and other reasons, generally the inflation in the dollar world is 2-3%. और यहाँ पे हमारे यहाँ 10%. So this difference of the losing the value of the currency, it's nothing. We don't need to be so hung up, as you said. This is not national prestige. I used to travel in a taxi. Sorry, you mentioned my age, but anyway, when it was 1 rupee or minimum fare was 1 or 2 rupees or whatever, 3 rupees 70 paise. Today the minimum fare is what, 32 rupees or something, 25 rupees. So I don't get fret over this. This is Mehungai. This is the natural course of inflation. Of course, if we can focus the effort on going from 10% inflation to maybe 3 or 4%, that will be a real achievement.
Mr. Ranade, you know these numbers, but for the audience, sheer coincidence, like he said, market-determined coincidence actually. In the 75th year of our independence, the rupee was 75, but within a short period, it it touched 80. In 2047, what will the rupee be? And if you have a value in mind, also tell us what will the economic size of India be?
Economic size of India is easier to say because I'm going to assume it's going to grow at average rate of 7% or higher because that's what it's done in the last 40 years. The average rate for India's growth rate is 7% over the last 40 years. So in the next 25 years, if I assume 7 or 7.5%, it goes about 6 times bigger. So it will be $3 trillion, 18-20 trillion to aaram se hoga.
Shamika, I'm coming to you. I'm following the same sequence. The rupee at 100 when India is 100?
A lot of it, I think, eventually, Siddharth, will depend on our export competitiveness. And
but as someone who actually deciphers numbers and makes them very, very lucid, is the rupee at 100 problem? Is it a negative thing, or is it the way the economy will function?
It is not a problem. I think this psychological warfare that I think media and politicians play on the people, this needs to stop. I don't think the value of the rupee is intrinsically linked with national pride, because remember, when it falls in value, there is a very large segment, possibly a competitive part of the economy, which actually gains. And those are the sectors we are trying to promote. We know that many Asian economies have grown on the back of export competitiveness. We have known that for decades China has maintained and absolutely manipulated currency for a reason. So let's not be so naive, and I hold media and politicians responsible, but we should be smarter.
I'm glad you didn't fully point towards me or us. That's not the media that we represent. Mr. Gopalan, I'm coming to you, sir. If you on the rupee, before I go to Mr. Cha. Mr. Gopalan, Shamika gave us a very important point, and sometimes we again lose sleep. Oh, China is doing this, China is doing this. But China is a managed economy. We are a democracy where there are multiple pulls and pressures. Mr. Gopalan, in your entire career working experience, was the rupee ever manipulated? For the information of the audience, he spent many, many years in the finance ministry as well.
Well, I don't think the rupee was manipulated.
Mic, just keep it closer, it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I have not I have not experienced any time rupee getting manipulated at all. It was, I mean, after 91 devaluation which took place, we really allowed the rupee to kind of, find its own level. There were times when we need to agreed foreign exchange. So at that time, probably there was some distortion taking place. But beyond that, there was no question of any manipulation of the rupee-dollar exchange rate.
Mr. Gopalan, one quick follow-up before I go to Mr. Chand. This is to do with the strength of our financial and monetary system. There have been questions in the past by a certain vested interest, I would say, which tried to portray that, oh, things were not well, North Bloc was manipulating and managing Mint Street. Is that correct, sir? What would you say today?
There were always tension between the finance ministry and the RBI. Yes, there was some tension. The question is that how you view the economy, in what manner, and what are your objectives versus what RBI thinks is the way it's likely to pan out. So in that sense, there are always some tension going on. But the question was that both had the intention that we should grow the economy, we should have less problems in the real economy as well as in the financial sector, and we should ensure that the shocks which come from internal and external shocks, how do we handle them?
Right.
In a manner which is in a mature manner and less disturbance to a large number of people. So that's the objective which we had. Though approaches may differ, but the objectives were the same.
Okay. We'll come back to Mehengai, our inflation management system, and how big an issue Mehengai is. Mr. Chand, I'm coming to you on a very important point that you said in your earlier remark. The youth from our agriculture sector and the lack of jobs and the societal tensions that will be created. Our land sizes are fragmenting, and many people talk about brain drain, but that is only of the classes. There is a brain drain in the masses. States, and I'll take the name of Punjab, has suffered. Families are broken. There is deep societal pressure in Punjab on account of sustained decadal brain drain from the farming society, and we sometimes in our drawing rooms forget about it. Will that brain drain ever get reversed? Do you feel confident that when we are meeting 5-10 years down on a subject like this, the situation will be different?
I think you have raised a very important issue of brain drain, but all manpower that is going out of country is not necessarily brain drain. Even in the case of brain drain, I think it was one of the member of former planning commission who gave a very nice explanation for it. His view was brain drain is better than keeping brain in the drain. So if you are not channelizing energy of people properly, then it is better to not to stop them from remaining in the country. So that aspect is very important, that you create proper environment. Coming to general kind of movement of people, you mentioned particularly about Punjab. It is not brain drain there. The reasons are totally different there. My fear is that we need to prevent Punjab now and other states subsequently from going the Latin American way. And that Latin American way is that it is not agriculture which is failing you, it is the non-agriculture which is failing you. Non-agriculture is failing you because it is not giving attractive or decent employment to people. So how we can do this? It is not that you can keep people in the field job, manual jobs. There are possibilities of creating jobs post-harvest agriculture. But then that will require a lot of private sector investment, value chains, packaging, and so many things. It is possible to do that.
Quick interjection, sir, but private sector intervention is required. Everyone, all economists agree on that, but the farmers themselves don't seem to agree about that. We know what has happened in the recent past. You, sir, and then Shamika wants to come in.
Yeah.
Please go ahead, sir.
Opposition is not everywhere. I delivered a lecture last week to Punjab, and there were some interesting things which I would like to share with you. This usual argument that our productivity is not growing because we have reached plateau. I gave them the example, Andhra has much higher productivity than you, still their agriculture is growing at 7% per year. So if you are not diversifying your agriculture and then putting blame, we are not growing because we are growing only rice and wheat, not fruit and vegetables. And if you then come, how fruit and vegetable would be grown? Linkage with private sector is very, very important. You look at Andhra. How come almost 1/5, 18% of total fruit production of this country happen in Andhra? How come 50% of growth of fishery of last 7-8 years happened only in one state? It is all private sector
Which
driven.
is that state, sir?
Andhra Pradesh.
Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah, and it is just going on. It is all private sector driven. They are welcoming private sector. They are creating whatever required change in regulation is there. So this opposition to those formula, I would still say it was unfortunate. These laws were not appropriately understood. But now you find that private sector investment, despite withdrawal of formula by the central government, lot of interest in private sector in agriculture. That is increasing.
Right.
And investment are coming in agriculture.
Right. Shamika, you wanted to come in.
I think, the example of Punjab is a very important one where we have to learn from the failures there. I think I squarely blame bad policy making, Siddharth. We have to be very clear because we have this freebie debate right
Who's
now.
bad policy making?
Well, the
Just to be-
government bad policy.
A center state.
Well, to a large extent it is state because
Okay.
when you study the state economy, the freebie debate, in fact, the example that we have to learn from in the freebie debate is that the state basically ran out of fiscal space because you are cross-subsidizing agriculture to an extent where you really are non-competitive when it comes to manufacturing and services. In fact, it's very important for everyone to know that Punjab is perhaps it used to be the richest state in the country 20 years back. It is the only state, very unfortunately, which has undergone rapid deindustrialization. Why did the private sector migrate to the neighboring states? They didn't go out to China. They went to Himachal Pradesh, they went to Haryana. Why?
To Rajasthan.
To Rajasthan. And those states gained because they had the fiscal space. They were not cross-subsidizing agriculture to an extent that you're not only doing damage to your ecology, but you are severely killing your own economy. So the freebie debate that we have right now, you have to look at incentives. That it is not that if you have the money, you can give it. No. It has to be on the long term. What does it do to distortions within the state?
So, Shamika, I'm posing this question to you. India of 2047, freebies lesser, lower, or?
I frankly think I'm concerned about this, Siddharth. I hope it is good freebies, meaning you need state to give you education, you need state to give you health, you need state to give you clean air. The markets are not going to be very easily able to do that. We know there are market failures there. But now we are getting into the path of competitive freebieism. But the conversation has started. So hopefully, if this correcting mechanism happens, we'll have smart subsidies, not just rampant subsidies.
Mr. Gopalan, 2 rupees rice, it started from there and some other schemes as well. Today we have 5 kgs, a subsidy bill upwards of 3.7 lakh crore. Will it end?
Well, certain amount of, you see, you must look at certain externalities in some of these actions which we are taking. For instance, Shamika mentioned about health, education. We look at water supply, sanitation, climate-related issues. Then you have old age pensions, and you have people who are hungry, you have got to feed them. These are some of the things which we really need to do, where the freebies have a role to play. I mean, I don't call them freebies, they're essentials.
So you are a votary for the 5 kilo scheme, the Pradhan Mantri Anna Kalyan Yojana?
You see, so long as that set of people are not able to earn, buy on their own and then feed themselves, the state has to intervene.
Mr. Ranade, this is the point I wanted to take with you. Sometimes, again, drawing room economics, and we say, India should be subsidy mukt Bharat. Is that feasible? Because we forget 40% of our population, even growing at a slower rate, by that time will continue to need support. Is subsidy mukt Bharat required, essential or not?
First of all, the big myth, please blow it away, that all countries subsidize food. In fact, the amount of per capita subsidies in Europe is far greater than India. It is per capita, per animal, per cattle. So actually in France and all. So let's be completely free of this myth that there's no country in the world. Rice in Japan is 300% more expensive than the rest of the world. Nobody is complaining why are the farmers getting subsidized there. Food is a very, that's one point. Second point is, please look at India's, while we are proud of our fastest growth economy, look at India's rank in the World Hunger Index. Child malnutrition, wasting, stunting, that means we are the world's largest producer of milk. Amul is a 50,000 crore company, but our per capita consumption of milk is barely half of world average, or a little more. So we have a long way to go in terms of basics like nutrition, per capita consumption of proteins. Mr. Chand mentioned, of course, the fantastic achievement of the past 75 years in agriculture, but even today, if I'm not mistaken, we are heavily dependent on pulses. We are, per capita consumption of pulses is low. We import almost, 20-30% of edible oils.
Yeah.
So therefore, if that is the case,
$1 billion worth of sunflower oil from Ukraine, who could have imagined?
And one more thing on subsidies, I think we are very soon going to go to a situation where we will introduce, it was talked about in the economic survey 5 years ago, universal basic income. If UBI comes, are we going to call it a subsidy? Of course not. The PM Kisan, is it a subsidy? And you mentioned...
no, I'm asking you, is it?
Is
not,
it a freebie? It is not, because these are ensuring basic rights of the people. Surely, for food, addressing food, hunger, malnutrition is not subsidy, Baba. It's not a freebie.
Ramesh ji, is the judiciary right in trying to get into this debate? Sarkar agar logon ko dena chahe, why is the judiciary having a problem?
You see, whether it is judiciary which is taking up or any other organ of government, I feel this debate is needed. We must have this debated because of a couple of reasons.
So you agree with the Prime Minister and the Revdi kind
I'm
of
for
debate?
the debate. I'm for the debate on subsidies, and I can give you one example. There are some circumstances, some situation where you need freebies. And there are some circumstances and situations where you are not only wasting resources, even freebies are doing a lot of damage.
Give us an example, sir.
Yeah, I'm coming to an example. Right now, we are giving free power in many states, free power for agriculture. And we all know that water table is going down. It is creating a serious issue in many states that future generation may not even have good quality water to drink. That is the kind of situation. And it is not that water is free. So you are encouraging that if you are extracting more water, we are fully subsidizing you. So you spoil as much water as you can. Same amount can go for conservation of water. That if in a particular area, farmers are adopting water saving practice, as a result of which the water table is coming up rather than coming down. I am for that kind of freebies. So how you structure a particular kind of support, but effect it has on other sector, whether it is crowding out all good things, we need to take all those things into consideration. Lastly, you raised this issue of food at 2 rupee or 4 rupee. I agree with the Gopalan ji that as long as we have poor people or people who can't afford it, we will need those kind of assistance. But is it that in India, 2/3 of people can't afford that food? I don't agree with that. I would say that we need subsidized food, but not for 2/3 of population. We need to work out what is that population, whether it is 1/3, like earlier we were having APL population and BPL population. I will strongly support any kind of freebie for food for BPL population, those who are below poverty line, but not for those who are above poverty line.
Okay, that's a very important point. Shamika, any other points before we move on? Okay, I'll move on. Subsidy Mukt Bharat say we come to the point about Mehngai Mukt Bharat. Now, as we have grown, output has increased, so have prices. And price rise means it devalues your assets. The example that Ajit gave at the very start. Mehngai Mukt Bharat, at least not completely. Is that possible? Because again, it's a huge burden on the tax-paying middle class. The rich are finite, and there's a huge subsidy burden that we have just spoken about. Shamika.
You know, again, on the inflation bit, Siddharth, we have to be clear. Food inflation. I mean, again, what aspects of food inflation? What you see, I have a feeling it's the creditor organizations of the world, like IMF, which are so obsessed with inflation that, you know, certain amount of inflation is also healthy inflation in a country. And of course, currently, a lot of our problems are imported in the sense it's coming with the energy dependence that we have externally. So I think the obsession with, first of all, let's not have the same debates that Washington and London are having, because our problems are not that, number one. So their problem with inflation is a very serious problem. Ours is not of that nature. Yes, if it's related to energy, it is. But many aspects of inflation are also good. Because remember, when food prices go up, it's really a transfer to farmers. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. So stop looking at inflation as all bad or all good.
Okay. Ajit, I'm coming on that point. Mehngai Mukt Bharat.
There was an RBI paper, by the way, many years ago, maybe 10, 15 years ago, which said what should the optimum level of inflation be for India? Because if you have 0% inflation, you know, you're removing the producer incentives. And for a developing country, see, the US has inflation because it's a developed country, so 2% is okay. Japan has 0 or -%. It's a shrinking population. So for our country, what is the optimum rate? The RBI's estimate then was about 5 to 6%. And I think India's political economy is so sensitive. So forget about the current phase, which is partly Ukraine war, partly the Chinese lockdowns. So this should not be taken as a benchmark. Our last history of 75 years and even future, because our political economy is so sensitive, this is one thing that we have achieved well, much better than the South American developing countries or other parts of the world, is inflation management. Because I think our political system responds very quickly. We use monetary mechanisms, we use fiscal mechanisms, we also use administrative mechanisms. So I'm not so worried about inflation in the future. We have done pretty well, and let's not be, like Shamika says, I think 4 to 5% for a developing economy like India is okay. In fact, it's good because it provides incentives to produce. She mentioned farmers. What about, industry? Imagine a guy, an employee in a factory, you say, "Aapko increment kitna milega?" 0% milega, 1%. I mean, there will be a rebellion. So if everybody wants an increment of 5 to 7%, I remember in some companies, if they get an increment of only 9%, there are, glum and sad faces. So if you're going to give labor, everybody 9% increment, you can't have zero inflation. So I think what the short point is, for a developing economy, I think 4 to 5% or 6% is not bad at this stage of our development.
Okay, one quick follow-up on that. The current monetary policy framework, if it was up to you, what would you amend it to be able to project for an economy 25 years down the line?
I think we should consider going back as it is, as you can see in many parts of the world. The central bank is becoming subservient to the goals of the political masters. I mean, even in countries like Japan, and that's thanks to...
You think it's happening in India as well?
We can't say. I mean, it's possible. I mean, they call it coordination now. They don't call it subservience. But I think this inflation, just exclusive mandate on inflation control is something we need to revisit, re-examine, and go back to the multidimensional outlook. See, the RBI used to be concerned not only about inflation. They used to look at employment growth. They used to look at adequate availability of credit. They used to look at financial stability of the system, about the NPA levels. This is called the multidimensional approach. Now people say, "Ye thoda bahut fuzzy hai, isko ek hi mandate do." And that I don't think has worked well, because even since 2016 when we had this, in the last 2-3 years, they've consistently exceeded inflation. The target was 2 to 6%. It's consistently above 6% for 2 years. Nobody's been taken to task. They have not come to parliament to answer questions. So let's go back to, I think there is a case to be made that we should reconsider going back to a system which is multidimensional. Look at all aspects, and depending on the situation, balance the objectives.
Mr. Gopalan, on that point quickly before I move to the last topic for this panel.
Well, I mean, inflation is something which is a political decision, or what the politicians can think is affordable or bearable in this country. So that's how it is. But there are theoretical underpinnings for it. The social preference rate of capital is one area where you look into before you get into what is the optimal rate of inflation which you should have in the country. Well, under the circumstances, what the present range seems to be okay, seems to be good. But if the economy grows, if the productivity goes up in the economy, which there are many steps which should be taken, and when they are taken, if the productivity goes up in the economy, possibly that range may come down. But that once again is little theoretical than practical. But as everybody says, which is very important, that producer price, has to show some increase for profits to really pass on. Agriculturalists will have to have resources transferred to them so that there is some amount of inflation is essential. I'm not going to disagree with any of those points, but we should have, at what point in time we take a view on this is relevant.
Right. Okay. The panel discussion was walking on fire, shepherding the Indian economy through a battle-strewn world. And what the author of that perhaps must have meant, I recall, and it echoes in me, Mr. Arun Puri, the chairman of the India Today group at our Independence Day celebration, said something which stayed with me, which was about how hopeful he is for the future of this country. And I say this in the context of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, minus the textile miracle, even Bangladesh, if I could argue. And of course, we are not even talking about small island nations. India, a miracle nation. I come to this panel for a final round. Sir, Mr. Chand, I am coming to you. If you want to also give us an estimate of how large will our economy be and what should we be hopeful about in the miracle that our economy and this country has been.
I would say that today, center as well as states, both are fully supporting and initiating different measures to accelerate our growth rate. Nobody seems to be content even with 7% growth rate. Everybody is trying that we should take it to double digit, because if something happened toward the later years of 2047, then you deny the gain to almost one generation. So therefore, we have to start growing at as early as possible. So like our PM has given a slogan of 5 trillion economy, corresponding to that, TN has a slogan of 1 trillion economy, UP has a slogan of 1 trillion economy. Other states are also taking, I think, some inspiration from this, and they are going toward it.
Right.
So I think immediately what we will be required is to put our growth rate at 10%, have that for almost 2 decades, and after that, even if we are back to 4% or 5% kind of growth, we will reach a goal of closer to what is the income in developed country. So that should be our goal.
Our national goal.
Yeah. Immediately we raise it to double-digit growth, then it can taper off after 2 decades or so.
Shamika, I come to you in the 5 minutes that we have left. Quick replies.
I think we need to refocus on the two key gaps, I think, Siddharth, which I think we are talking about it, but we have to identify these are strategically two of our biggest impediments. One is recognition that our biggest strength is human resource, the labor force, the fact that we are young. We are growing old, but we're still a young country. Uneducated, meaning unskilled and unhealthy people cannot grow a nation. You will always have a huge monkey on your back, regardless of pockets of growth. So I think the recognition that our youth unemployment today is nearly 4 times overall unemployment. And do you know that graduate unemployment, meaning people who are holding graduate degree and above, are nearly 6 times more unemployed than the same youth with less than primary education degree. So clearly the quality of education is a very, very big problem. So skills of people, and I think basic healthcare, which I think the pandemic has dealt us a blow, and we're doing a lot of course correction across the states, but I think we have to go back to skills very, very, very fundamentally.
Mr. Gopalan, that same question to you before I let Mr. Ranade end today's session.
Yeah, I would look at 2-3 things. One is the labor force participation rate of women. How is it that we are going to increase it from 21 to where China has about 70? How are we going to increase it? That requires creating opportunities, and also there will be social issues within the family issues involved. How we are going to handle that is another area which a lot of people in the social areas, they should be in a position to look at and work on. Second, I should look at looking at consumption of those who are the lower half, about 500 million people who. How do you increase that? How do you ensure that labor-oriented industries, manufacturing really pick up? How do you make it efficient? How do you ensure law and order allows those kind of industry to set up in the areas where they are required to be set up? These are some thoughts which I leave with you, because these are areas where people are working on, but not enough is seen. So these areas, I think, is going to be very, very crucial.
Sometimes people lose sight of the fact that a well-lit bus stop, proper street lights, and a safe bus system or metro system is all that it requires for women to work. And if any of you have traveled in our industrial centers, one of the key things you will see about women's participation in the labor force is the basic 3 elements that we spoke about. Bharat Bhagya Vidata, Ajit Ranade, at the very end, the last comment on our panel today.
Thank you, Siddharth.
Where will we go?
Thank you. First of all, if Uttar Pradesh was a country, it would be the 5th largest country. If Maharashtra was a country, it would be probably in the top 15 or top 12 countries. So when you say कि India को क्या करना है, you're basically asking me to कि 15 देश मिलके कैसा करेंगे. I just told you that India is 1/6 of humanity, so it's not a simple problem. But growth comes from capital. And capital is not only physical or financial capital of new factories or new financial deepening and UPI transactions. It is actually human capital, and Shamika said that. Half the country is below the age of 27. 40% of the country is below the age of 18 or 20. In fact, in 25 years, they'll be barely in their 40s. That's where the action is. Human capital is that is the surest determinant of long-term, sustainable, high-quality growth. So I think if you ask me one magic word, and we had a session on that, education, education, education. That's the magic word. We need to really substantially improve or reform education system so that this capital, human capital, is unshackled and really realizes true potential. And if you ask me what is the development status that I would aspire to, number 1, where I can open my tap and drink water from the tap. Everybody in India. Number 2, when I send my kids to the nearest municipal school. Number 3, where all the rich guys travel by public transportation. So if we can attain these 3 things, I think we have done it well.
We'll end with a round of applause for those aspirations. Thank you very much to this panel for this wonderful, wonderful debate. Thank you very much.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.